Everyone there? I lost everybody now. Let me try again. I've lost you, the four of you now. Everyone there? Anybody here? You found me? I'm streaming live. Yeah, one of you is here. Okay, who's here? And we'll start like this. Is okay. There are two of you here. Good. So I think maybe one more of you. And hope we get a student on. Dear, oh dear, oh dear. Okay, Chung, hi. You found me easily, so maybe it's only you, Chung. When it's two, maybe I'm one. Yo, you're okay? Good. Oh no, you're. You are, you Hill? Okay, so we've got Hill and Chung. Okay. Only one of you again now. Okay. So just Chung. Two of you again. Okay, maybe Hill and Chung. You're saying the audio is good and the video is okay, I think. So obviously you can read the board. I might shut the curtain so there's no light on it. That a bit better? Yeah, that's much better, isn't it? Okay. We've lost Brian. Brian. Okay, three of you. Oh yeah, good. Okay. Still only the three of you because no students. Should I? Oh, four. Who's the fourth person there? Is there somebody else there now? Or is the fourth person me? Please show yourself, whoever you are. Okay. I'm going to go ahead with it anyway at 4 p.m. VN because it'll be recorded, I do hope. So it'll be useful for the future, but it'll be nice to have some students out there asking questions. All right. I've got one thumbs up from somebody. Yeah. If somebody sends a thumbs down, I'll know who you are probably. Reminds me of when I stood for, all 5 people now, okay, good. Reminds me when I stood for the local government in Sydney many years ago, and my friend's wife, I got 41 votes, I think, 42 votes. And my friend's wife said she was one of them because she thought it should be the only vote. Oh, somebody's gone already. That was only 4. So, Joel, Brian, Chung, me, 5 again. Okay. We're going to start in 5 minutes, whatever happens. So, can the 5th person let me know who you are? You're a student? You could have at least one. Who are you? Maybe you're Miss Chung Ha, maybe you're Robert, maybe you're Mike in New Zealand. Be nice if you're a student. But anyway, it'll be recorded. So it sounds like the sound is okay and the video is okay. So send me a message if anything's not good. Let me know. I'm not speaking that loudly, which is good if you're hearing me okay. I gather they're still doing IELTS in Sydney, which is surprising, but because they've stopped it, I think they've stopped it in England and they've stopped it in Hanoi long ago. So if somebody's doing IELTS somewhere, maybe you're going to do it again one day, Chum, or maybe you'll do it. Right. Ah, my fan. So who's my fan? Is that my from IDP? Who are you, Mai? Which Mai are you? Is it IDP Mai? I saw that you joined my channel, but I wasn't sure who you are. Oh, who are you, Mai? The only Mai I think I know is IDP. Is it you? Hi, Anne's friend. Oh, okay. All right. Okay, so it's friends and friends. No family yet. Well, thank you anyway. I hope you're going to take IELTS. Are you, Mai? Are you going to take IELTS? Then I'll feel it's all worthwhile. Are you taking IELTS? Where are you? Are you in Sydney? Is that the Mai with the German husband? The tiny pictures I can't really see. You might be the Mai with the German husband, are you? We went to the restaurant in Parramatta, didn't we? 6 people now. Who's the other person? Show me. Who are you? Number 6. Oh, back to 5. They've run away. Oh, it's not her. Okay. Okay, well, you're hi, Anne's friend. Well, I hope are you going to take the IELTS soon, my fam? It's lovely to have you here. I hope it can be some use for you. 2 minutes to start. Down to 4. Somebody's given up. We're here. All right. Well, I really appreciate it if my friends can hang on, because you know, I might be recording it and suddenly find that the volume's gone or something, or the video's gone, and I don't know. So, 5 people again. Give it, say, maximum 5 minutes. We start maximum. It's about 2 minutes to go. Let's say 3 minutes left. I feel actually more comfortable talking to people than talking to myself. Starting soon. People still. You see some of those YouTube places, they've got like 90,000 viewers or something. I've got 6 now. Who's the other person there? We've got Mai, we've got Hyol, we've got Brian, we've got Chung, we've got, maybe I'm one of the 6. One other person. Who's new? Who's arrived? What's your name? Oh, gone. Disappeared. Oh dear. Okay. Right. Well, I think it's 4 o'clock in Vietnam now. Good afternoon. Right. Okay, if you're late, well, that's your fault. So, all right. So, good afternoon. Welcome to the IELTS speaking briefing today. Now, I hope lots of somebody says there's a million views here. All right. So, let's start. Please keep in touch on the live chat. If you didn't send any questions on contact@vuigroup.com, well, please send them now on live chat while you're watching. All right, because it's easier if I can keep an eye on the live chat and I can monitor things as we go. All right. So I thought about using PowerPoint. I thought no today. Where I need to show you the slides, I will show you. I'll take it nice and slow. And really, the whole point of this being live is for questions. That's the whole point why I'm here, not recorded yet. So please send a question whenever you have it, and I'll deal with it live. All right. That includes people I know who aren't students as well. If you've got any questions, let me know. That's why I'm here. All right. Next time when I'm doing the writing, I think I'll have a fancy green screen with a movie behind me showing PowerPoint and other things. 7 of you now, so good. Please let me know if you're a student about to take IELTS. Send me a quick message, and please send any questions you have. I expect it to last an hour and a half, so it should be done by 5:30, your time there in Hanoi. As I say, really, it's very much up to you. So we're going to deal, the main purpose today is error correction, getting it right for your speaking, improving your performance, giving it something special, because it's not that difficult to get a 6 in IELTS, because a 6 is competent. Now, competent means, okay, you can be understood, go to the supermarket, you can talk to people, you can catch a bus, but it's okay, competent. But you need to constantly think that you want to be a 7, I assume. And you want to be a 7, we call a 7 good. And it just takes that little bit of effort and concentration for the 30 minutes, 12 minutes of the test to show the examiner that you're good. Also, the point of today is you could be anywhere in the world watching this, but I guess all of you are in Vietnam or Sydney in the case of Trung. So obviously we're going to put a specific focus on Vietnamese issues. And Vietnamese have particular issues when it comes to speaking. And, I'm familiar with pretty much all of them because many, many, many years working on IELTS in Hanoi. I'm not shouting here. If at any time the volume's no good, just let me know. Tell me if there's a problem with the picture or the sound. All right, so we're going to have an overview of the IELTS test for those of you who are unfamiliar with it or forgotten, and tips for improvement in each of the 3 parts, part 1, 2, 3, avoiding errors, looking at the question types, and trying to impress the examiner. Right. So, what sort of scores are you all looking for? Now, some of you, one of you, Chung, for example, you've already migrated. Brian, I know you should take it because you've got a very good level. Xiao, pretty good too. Mai, can't remember how I know you. I wonder what you worry about most. Do you worry about your pronunciation? Do you worry about feeling uneasy, unnatural, scared, talking in a language that's not your own? Do you worry about thinking of things to say? Can you fill 2 minutes? We'll deal with all of that. Just the technicalities on exam day. You check in, try and be about 30 minutes early. The examiners and the staff appreciate that very much. They'll wait you outside the speaking room. The examiner will welcome you in. Remember your ID on the day. Remember your identification. And preferably, in fact, really, almost certainly, if you've registered your ID card, bring your ID card, not your passport, and vice versa. And with the exam, there's the introduction, you take a seat, the examiner reads the details, but the actual recording, the actual monitoring of the performance begins when the examiner says good morning, good afternoon. That's when he's assessing you from that point on, which will be, as I say, 12, 13, 14 minutes. Remember, the examiner wants you to show your best language. He's there to help you. He's not trying to scare you or trip you up. He wants you to do well, particularly, in a situation like Hanoi, where most of those examiners, if not all of them, have lived there for a very long time. So they really do want to help you, give you the best possible rating. They're never in a hurry. It's always 11 to 14 minutes. And so people sometimes say, oh, that was quick. People say, oh, is that over already? Was that quick? Well, that's probably a good sign for the candidate. If they feel it went quickly, it won't have gone too quickly because every examiner follows the procedure. But if it felt like it went quickly, you probably were relaxed and maybe you did okay. Test structure. All right, think you familiar with these? Now, I'm not sure how the light's working on that. Can you see that okay or not? Anyway, we've got 3 parts. I just wonder whether to turn the light down. But I'll just turn the light down a moment. No, a better. So, okay. All right. So you got your 3 parts, as I mentioned, and you're scored on 4 separate criteria: fluency and coherence. You all know what that means, fluency and coherence. Coherence is similar to writing. It's the structure, how you organize what you say. The fluency is how smoothly you deliver it. Do you hesitate? Do you pause? Do you repeat yourself? Do you develop the topic? We don't want lots of ums and ers. Do you structure it using what we call discourse markers? On the other hand, another point is, however, moreover. Lexical resource, vocabulary. In writing, we want lots and lots of academic, formal language. In speaking, less formality is required, but still we'd like the less common language, the language which a native speaker might select. Idioms, they come into vocabulary, lexical resource. Some people go into a speaking test and think all we want to hear are lots and lots of idioms. Well, we don't. People spend a lot of time learning many, many idioms. And in fact, the chance of you using them appropriately is often quite small. Far better than idioms is the use of collocation. Collocations are more natural. Collocations are more typical of a native speaker. And collocations are more flexible. And it's far more likely you can use a collocation. If you've learned some good collocations, then you can probably use a few of them during the interview. We have grammatical range and accuracy, which means, of course, getting your grammar right, but also having a wide range. Now, just like with lexical resource, if you make no mistakes in the usage of the vocabulary, and in the grammar, you make no mistakes in your grammar, but you don't have much range, you're not going to get a very high mark, maybe a 6 or a 5. So we want range of grammar. All right? Show the range, try and be accurate, but if you have greater range, then we would expect to see or hear more error. So that's okay. Wide range includes some error. Pronunciation. With the Vietnamese, I think you know it's a particular issue for the Vietnamese. basic building block of pronunciation is, can you be understood? Can the examiner understand you? After that, do you get it right? Do you mispronounce things? Do you fail to pronounce the endings of words? Do you not pronounce your S's, your EDs? And then, are you accurate with the various phonemes? Do you pronounce words correctly, including the ending? And then, at a higher level, do you have the stress, the intonation? Do you have the inflection? Do you chunk? Do you pause in the same way as a native speaker might? The examiner gives you a score across, I just see my question. Great, thank you. I'll come to that. The examiner gives you 4 scores, which you never see. And the 4 scores are then averaged out. They're scored across the whole test. Part 1, Part 2, Part 3. You can't just leave without finishing Part 3, or you get 0. So you have 4 scores, and then they are rounded down. So if you get 7, 7, 7, and 6 across fluency, lexical resource, grammatical range and accuracy and pronunciation. If you get 7, 7, 7, 6, you will get 6.5, not 7. FAM, it's okay. My FAM, you struggle with unpopular topic, ideas, and vocabulary. Okay, thank you very much. We'll come to that shortly. Any other questions as we go? Please send them on the chat to YouTube. We have here band descriptors. This is what the examiner uses. This is the public version. Please find it. Got 8 of you now. Good. Who's another one? Come along. Please find it on Google. Go public IELTS band descriptors speaking test, and it will show you the public version. This public version is invaluable for you. It's very similar to what we use and what is used by IELTS to determine your score. All right. Now, say you're going for a 7, which is what I would hope all of you are looking for, a 7. If you're aiming for 7, I wonder what band score you should look at. Obviously, look at 7, because 7 is good. It's worth looking at 8. 8 is very good. 6, as I say, is competent, which is okay. But 5 is very useful, because 5 is called modest. Now, modest, obviously, means, not quite okay. But if you look at 5, it's very much full of elements which you don't want to do. So, for example, discourse markers, in fluency and coherence. Discourse markers, they're the things that structure and connect your speaking. Things like I mentioned, however, moreover, on the other hand. Now, if you use those and you use them well, you're talking a 7. But if you use them and you overuse them, as some people do, they learn all the discourse markers and they fill their speaking with discourse markers. If I might turn to now, having said that, on the other hand, can I now think about, but there's nothing in between. Just a whole collection of discourse markers. If you learn them and you overuse them, you'll be on a 5. Maybe even worse than you didn't use them at all. So remember that. All right, so you should look at 5. 5 tells you the things you don't want. Hesitation, repetition, lots of errors. So look at 5, learn what you need to avoid, and Look at 7 for the things you want to do and you want to do well. All right, thank you for that. You can't read it too well. Not so good. I mean, you can't read it in detail. It's just to show you that you need to find it on Google. Yes, it's okay. I'm just showing you what you see, really. I don't think you can read the detail at the moment. That's okay. The fact is, you find this for yourself on Google, print it off, and have a good read of it. It's IELTS band descriptors, and it'll say public version. All right. And it lists the band scores and the 4 criteria and what the examiner's looking for. It is too small for you to read now, just as long as you can get the idea of what it looks like. All right, fluency, coherence, and lexical resource. Fluency and coherence, I just mentioned that to you. The connections between your ideas and the flow of your English. No, not much repetition, not much hesitation. Lexical resource, vocabulary, I mentioned. Idioms. If you've got some idioms, there's a chance that you might be able to use an appropriate idiom. Maybe you can put it in the right context, but if you were to learn 100 idioms, it's unlikely you could use more than maybe 2, maybe none. You'd have wasted your time. The examiner's heard all the idioms, and unless you're going to use them correctly, you're probably doing yourself damage. If you can appropriately use an idiom, great. Some idioms are cliches, means they're used too much, too often. Some will be okay, but as I mentioned before, collocation is far better. It's far more sophisticated. More on the vocabulary, the lexical resource. Again, you find all this in those band descriptors. Things like paraphrasing. Paraphrasing is key, particularly when you hear the question from the examiner. Don't just repeat the question back to him. If your friend said to you in Vietnamese, "What's the best place you've ever been to at Tet holiday?" you wouldn't say, "The best place I've ever been to at Tet holiday is." You'd paraphrase. You say, "A great place I've been to," or "A great place I went was," or you just cut to the answer. So paraphrase. Particularly in part 3 too. When you hear the question from the examiner, paraphrase your response. Phrasal verbs. We don't like them in writing. When speaking, they're fine. They're natural. Native speakers use phrasal verbs. And we all know what we mean by phrasal verbs. It's a verb with a preposition which has a special meaning when it's together. Just moving my mouse so I don't lose my screen or anything. Synonyms, a bit like paraphrasing, they're looking for alternative words with the same meaning. When you learn new vocabulary, check the pronunciation, check the synonyms, check the lexical family for other words in that group, like transport, and check for antonyms, opposites. If you're going to learn some idioms, as I say, fine, but learn some idiomatic expressions too. Longer idiomatic phrases are, again, more sophisticated, more native speaker-like. Something to remember with idioms, if you learn a full idiom, although we say idiomatic expressions are better than idioms, idioms often come in a very long form, like "the early bird catches the worms." Now, we hear that idiom a lot, but a native speaker would almost never say "the early bird catches the worms." He'd say, "I'm an early bird." There's a long idiom, "when in Rome, do as the Romans do." You'd never hear a native speaker say that. He'd say, "when in Rome, because another native speaker knows exactly what he's talking about. Collocations I've mentioned, and again, more precise and less common lexis. You want to be talking like a native speaker, and you want to be using more precise words. All right, we have some phrasal verbs. If any of you can think of some, maybe you can just type me some phrasal verbs. Just one or two. You can type me a phrasal verb or two. Just think about some of them. Got some here. We've got break down. Again, in writing, you want to avoid phrasal verbs. Some phrasal verbs can't be avoided in writing, but they're pretty much all okay for speaking. Break down. Maybe you mentally break down, or your car breaks down. Get ahead. Catch up. Come around to. Go out with. Play up. Slip up. Cool off. Run into. Catch on. Drop off. Turn up. Take off. Like Pizza Hut has really taken off. And pick up. My father picked me up at 6 p.m. Remember, when you have pronouns with a phrasal verb like pick up, you would say pick him up. You would never say pick up him. With a name, it's okay. I picked up James at the station. I picked James up at the station. And with a pronoun, it's always in the middle. Pick him up. If you can see those. Then I hope it helps, but I've just read them to you. All right. Phrasal verbs, good. Idiomatic expressions. For example, going window shopping. Costing an arm and a leg. Again, people tend to overuse that, and they've come in having learned cost an arm and a leg, and they're determined to put it into their interview, and you know, it can be overdone. But anyway, grabbing a bite to eat. A stone's throw from. Tongue-tied. The straw that broke the camel's back. The elephant in the room. Bit of a cliche sometimes. A dummy spit. It's a good Australian one. When somebody gets angry about something, they have a dummy spit. That's a good one. Throw in the towel. To live in the middle of nowhere. Again, a very good Australian one for that, living in the middle of nowhere. Australians would say, the back of whoop whoop. The back of whoop whoop. Oh, he lives in the back of whoop whoop. Living in the middle of nowhere. Now, if you happen to have an Australian examiner, that would be very good to use. Window shopping I mentioned at the beginning. You know, just make sure you use them correctly. Don't spoil them by using them wrongly. If you've got any comments or questions, please pop them on the chat line. It's not so clear, I know, but if you can see it, you can maybe zoom it later or something. Okay. Few of you arrived now. You can let me know who you are. Now, collocation is much more impressive, as I mentioned, much more flexible, much more useful. Instead of learning 100 idioms, you should find yourself a collocation dictionary. Teach yourself 20 or 30 or 40 collocations. They are extremely impressive. The examiner's ears prick up He notices them. He notices everything. He'll spot them. He notes them. He's impressed. So some collocations. Excuse that phone. One might be to curry favour. To curry favour. Can you work out what that means? To curry favour means to gain somebody's good feeling. To curry favour. Maybe you curry favour with the boss. Maybe you curry favour with your wife by doing the washing up, you know. You curry favour. Good one. Peace and quiet. Collocation means that only a native speaker would think to produce and put those words together. Again, a bit like idioms, or a bit like phrasal verbs, that when those words come together, they may have a special meaning. Peace and quiet. To pass a law. We don't say to make a law. We don't say to have a law. We always say to pass a law or to legislate. To make a decision or take a decision. To change your mind. We don't say alter my mind. We don't say have a different mind. We say change your mind. It's quite simple, but it's a collocation. Historic building. Places of interest. Law of the land. There's a crisis of confidence. Get permission, very simple, but we don't say find permission, we don't say have permission. Well, we would say have permission, but get permission, you know. Seek permission is another good collocation. Please let me know if I'm too fast or you can't hear, you can't see. Go out of business. Go bust, go broke. Go out of business. They're collocations. Stark choice. Now that's good for writing as well. A stark choice. Deep division. Deep divisions. You can't please everyone. These are collocations. Well, maybe not see them so well, but maybe you can take a picture or something there, perhaps. And zoom. Any questions as we go along? A few of you out there now, so please keep them coming. Thank you. With some collocations, some mistakes you might make. Excuse me. People say like do progress. We never say do progress. We say make progress. Make progress in, not make progress about. I remember clearly, not I remember fully or obviously or other words. I remember clearly. Commit crime, not make crime. By the way, people who commit crime are not called crimers. It's a good guess, but no, they're called criminals. Excruciating pain. Excruciating means very, very bad. We wouldn't say excruciating joy. So excruciating means very bad, and it goes with something bad, like pain, not excruciating happiness. This is the kind of thing we might hear in an interview where somebody has simply swallowed a book of idioms, learnt them, and is determined to use them regardless of what their question, regardless of their topic. They just want to talk about, they just want to use their idioms. They might say something like, when I was knee-high to a grasshopper, I used to let my hair down by watching a movie. It was a great way to blow off some steam after being up to the ears in work. I particularly fancy movies with happy endings, so it is suitable that I like comedies. It's even better if they have ear-catching music. which can keep me on the edge of the seat. After a hard working day in the hustle and bustle, I'm over the moon when I watch movies. Now, various problems there. One, there were too many idioms. It's full of idioms. Two, they mixed them up, got them wrong. A common one we hear from Vietnamese is we hear blow off some steam. Obviously someone somewhere, presumably a Vietnamese teacher, has found an idiom and told people to use blow off some steam. Actually, we say let off some steam. But don't go and say let off some steam, because the examiners have heard them all. So yeah, they've mixed them up. Things like ear-catching music. We don't say ear-catching music. We say eye-catching movie. All right, so that was just too much idiom. Any questions, please send them in. I'll deal with them as they come. All right. Grammar and from. Now, it isn't just grammar, it's grammatical range and accuracy. So as I said before, if you have simple grammar with no mistakes, you will not get a high mark. You'll be on 6 or 5. If you have some mistakes, but you've got a wide range, you'll be on 7. So grammatical range and accuracy, as we say, avoid mistakes, but with greater range comes greater error. 5 for no errors, but nothing complicated, complex. 7 for complex structures, range of structures with some error. Pronunciation is the rhythm, stress, the intonation, and the accurate use of phonemes. Right, remember your questions, keep them coming, I'll deal with them. Now, some good idioms I would suggest might be worth using. Things like a thorn in the side. Can you guess what a thorn in the side means? Do you want to send me a chat line? Thorn in the side. Do an about face. Do an about face. Horses for courses. Horses for courses. Bite the bullet. A blessing in disguise. Flogging a dead horse. Cutting corners. Off the hook. Kill 2 birds with 1 stone. I wonder if you know what they all mean. They're good ones. There's hundreds. But again, don't be disappointed if you get through the exam and you haven't been able to use them. Better not to use them and to use an incorrect one. Because they're noticed. Excuse me. Just like the examiner, he spots a good collocation, good language. He also spots an awkward idiom, a forced idiom, or one that's got mixed up. So please think about it. The grammar overview. Things to think about apart from range. All right, I have a question there from Alex. Okay, sorry. What if we use the idioms in the exam but not 100% correct? Very good question there, Trung. To be honest, if you, certainly more than once, if you use an idiom incorrectly, I think I mentioned earlier, if you use it incorrectly, it jars with the examiner. He notices it in a negative way. He's not impressed by misusing an idiom. It's more negative or neutral. And if you do it several times, it's definitely negative. Collocation's better. So people think they've learnt lots of idioms and they're determined to put them in, and it just doesn't sound natural. So you say not 100% correct, if you're sort of 90% correct, okay. But if you've just forced lots of idioms in, then it's a negative for you. As I say, if you've learned 50 idioms, it's better to use none of them or maybe one of them than to use 5 of them incorrectly. All right? People don't realise that, I know. And I remember years ago, when I taught in Holland, and I'd hear Vietnamese students tell me, is it true that if you use lots of idioms, you get 7? No, it isn't. And I know people say that, and they think that. And the band descriptors, the public band descriptors say use of some idiomatic language. But it also says collocation. And as I say, too many idioms used correctly can be negative too. But if you use them incorrectly, it's generally negative. So focus on collocations. And as I say, if you've learned 100 idioms, you might not be able to use any of them. But if you're going to use idioms, try and learn less common ones anyway. Learn ones that maybe you haven't heard yourself before. Learn some new ones. Like I say, some of the ones I just mentioned to you are ones that maybe you haven't heard before. Because if you found a load of idioms on, say, a Vietnamese IELTS website, then the examiners live in Vietnam. So you can be sure they've heard them all, maybe 20 times that day. So, as I say, some of the ones I suggested to you, thorn in the side, and about face. About face means make a complete change of mind. Maybe I'll just try some new websites. All right, so the grammar overview. Grammatical range. Can you deal with singular and plural? There's the pronunciation issue of the S, but there's a grammar issue. Did you add the S? Did you forget the S? Did you use the correct article? Conditional structures. Sometimes your question will come in a conditional form. Just going to check a question here on Viber. Okay, that's fine. Deal with that. The question in part 2 often comes in a conditional. Talk about a place you would like to go to if you could, for example. So beware. Remember, if the question comes in conditional and you don't reply in the correct structure or tense, it will be noticed. The examiner's listening for 13 minutes. If the question's in the past tense, probably you'll need to answer in the past tense. Don't try and avoid it. You've got to bite the bullet and face it. So singular, plural, conditional structures. Things like, not only, but also, and I am no exception. Those things, if you use them correctly, are impressive. Those kinds of structures. Again, with grammar, remember, we do expect some error. If you look at those band descriptors, the public version, you'll see that it's something like, for band 7, something like a majority of sentences are error-free. So we don't expect perfection. Band score 7, we still expect and accept error. But we don't if it's all simple with no error. Whereas and while, you can use while, you can use whereas as a good way of linking clauses together. Some verb patterns. Things like expensive petrol leads to motorists reducing their kilometres, something like that. So you've got leads to motorists and a verb ing. Modality, the use of modal verbs. Could, should, may, might, will, must, ought to. Modal verbs. Remember, always follow a modal verb with an infinitive. Use the passive, just to show that you can use the passive. When you have your minute to prepare in part 2, include in your preparation the grammar. What am I going to show the examiner? And try and slip in some passive. It also avoids using silly subjects like people, they, he, it, Use some passive. Show that you know it. Relative clauses. You remember those? Defining relative clauses, non-defining relative clauses, and the relative pronouns. Who, whose, etc. And reduced relative clauses. Check that out. But reducing relative clause just avoids repetition, shows a bit more sophistication. So you might say something like, I can't think of an example at the moment, I'll come back to it. But reduced relative clauses and relative clauses. And subject-verb agreement. Try and make sure you get that right. That's a common problem for Vietnamese. All right. Any other questions? We go along still. Send them in. Grammar. Okay. Some more on grammatical range. Let's say you had this expression here. It's too simple. It's not complex, is it? My brother enjoys yogurts. They are tasty. Yogurts are easy to buy. Yogurts are good for people's health. That would be so much better with, I think yogurts are popular with so many consumers because of their convenience and nutrition. And I've eaten 2 a week since I moved here. Complex clauses, compound sentences. Complex, compound, not so much simple. All right. Dry throat here, I'm afraid. Pronunciation, contractions. In writing, we don't want contractions, do we? In speaking, contractions are natural. I'd instead of I would. He's instead of he is. Or he has. The strong and the weak sounds. Connections and discourse markers. I mentioned them earlier, discourse markers. Remember, they help with your structure. They connect your language together. And when you're preparing in the part 2, for 1 minute, remember to plan your structure. Plan your vocabulary, plan your grammar, plan your structure. Note the tense and try to remember the rhythm and the chunking. We'll come to chunking in a moment. Intonation and inflection. Native speakers don't always use a question mark for a question. They don't always say questions with a what, a how, or a who. They often just say something as a positive statement. But they indicate it's a question by raising the intonation at the end. You're working tomorrow. That's a question. You know it's a question because the person said, you're working tomorrow. They didn't say, you're working tomorrow. So intonation. And of course, understandability. I mentioned before with pronunciation, the basic building block is, can you be understood? The examiner can't understand you. There's no point, pronouncing the words correctly if they don't actually come out in a way that can be understood. Thought chunking. Now, on the YTV012 YouTube channel, there is a clip on chunking called Thought Chunking. And here's part of it. And there's an American lady there who, with a student, teaches you how to stress words, how to pause for emphasis, how to fix your intonation. Now, it's about 20 minutes long. Watch about the first 7 minutes. It's very useful. It's on the YouTube channel, this YouTube channel, YTV012, and it's called Thought Chunking, and just watch about 6 or 7 minutes of the 20-minute clip. Any other questions? Anybody? Word endings. Remember your word endings. Final consonants. I mentioned before. EDs. S. Words like health can come out as hell. from Vietnamese in particular. Words like house can come out as how. The wife, the knife, the life, the night, the nine, and the nice can come out as why, nigh, lie, nigh. And the examiner can probably guess, hopefully, what you're trying to say, but it's obviously incorrect. If you just say nigh, another person wouldn't know if you meant knife, night, nine, nice. So for 13 minutes, crisply pronounce everything that you can. And, you know, if you have to overpronounce, that's okay. For 13 minutes, if you end up saying knife or nice, it's much, much better than saying nigh, why, lie. 6 and sick. 9 and 9. Sorry, 9 and 9. 12 and 12. Finish the words. Excuse the phone. Another common one is things like child. The word is child, not child. And remember, when you're speaking, particularly in part 1, the examiner says, tell me about something you did when you were a child. Remember to answer with was and pronounce child. Frequently, candidates, the examiner says, tell me about something you did when you were a child. And the candidate says, when I were a child, when I was a child. And just remember when you're listening to the question, because Vietnamese is a monosyllabic language, most of your words have one syllable. That's fine, but they're also very short, clipped syllables, aren't they? When the examiner is speaking to you in English, we have polysyllabic words, more than one syllable. So when you hear a syllable which completes a word, remember to listen for the next one. For example, carpet. The examiner says carpet. Maybe you hear car and you think you've heard the word. On the end came the carpet. All right, so just remember, don't do kind of predictive listening. Listen for the whole word in the question, because it frequently is a problem for Vietnamese in speaking. They hear a word which has 2 or 3 syllables, and after they've identified a word on one syllable, they stop listening and they answer according to the wrong word. I hope you understand what I'm saying there. Carpet's not a good example, but it's like that, you know. Carpet. You get to car, you've heard a word, the rest of it comes afterwards. Pronunciation, correct pronunciation, you know. Selfish, shellfish. Necessary. We hear the word necessary so many times. We almost say it ourselves, but there's no such word necessary. It's necessary. Photographer, photographer, we hear. It's photographer. And often candidates don't know the word. In the past, there was the word photographer, and candidates didn't recognize the word because they thought of, if they heard the word photographer, they would understand it. So you just need to listen. If in a question you hear a word that sounds strange, it's unlikely it's going to be a strange word in the question. Try to think about where you might be mishearing the pronunciation. You might be unfamiliar with that pronunciation. Another very, very, very common problem for pronunciation is the third person singular. Frequently, teachers and examiners hear it's mean, it's work, it's depend, because you put the S in the wrong position when you speak. Okay? It means, it works, it depends. All right, deal with some of the questions as we go along. Please send more in. Intonation, again, this is the higher level of pronunciation. Remember, if you maybe get weak on grammar, maybe you can impress in pronunciation or impress in fluency. Because if you get, say, 8776, you'll still get a 7. So intonation for emotion, sentence stress, things like, I really loved the dress. It was an amazing film. I'll never forget that show. Again with the questions, upward inflection for uncertainty. You're working tomorrow? It's a question. Correct intonation shows you have understanding and spontaneity. It's not rehearsed. Spontaneity means spontaneous. You didn't rehearse your answer. You didn't memorize it. You've heard the question from the examiner and you're answering naturally with intonation for emotion. Topics. I'm going to run out of water. Topics. Now, I've got a secret list of topics here. Should be no surprise. These are the kinds of topics you get. Typical, unsurprising topics. All right, there's nothing secret there. Same old, same old. They come around, go. They go around, they come around again and again. But you know that in part 1, it's familiar topics. You know that in part 1, the first 3 questions will always be about your home, hometown, house, neighborhood, streets, or about work, or about study. Now, to be honest, depending on your age, I've got a question here. I'll just have a look at that moment. Okay, good. A couple of questions here. Good. 1 minute. To be honest, with your age makes a difference, because when the examiner sees your ID, he sees roughly how old you are. He sees the year you're born. Now, in Vietnam, if you're still at high school and an examiner said to you, what do you study? You're going to say, oh, I study 13 subjects, and they are. Do you think he wants to hear 13 subjects that you study? No. So if you look like your high school age from your ID, you probably avoid the what do you study, and obviously you don't work. So you're more likely to get the hometown, neighborhood type question. And you can do well by learning the vocabulary of the house, not just the window and a door. Learn about attics, basements, cellars, lofts and attics up there, basements and cellars down there, patio, terrace. You can make it up. Find a house that's got lots of things to talk about and make it up. Learn the vocabulary of the house, a neighborhood, work, study, get that vocabulary in. Questions here. Okay, we've got one. If I can't clearly hear a question, will I lose a mark for asking them to repeat it? Absolutely not. However, absolutely not. You would not lose marks. No problem to ask to repeat a question. Don't do it too much, but the examiner is sitting right in front of you. Nowadays, having a mask, of course, but it's highly unlikely that you won't hear the question clearly. Maybe you think you didn't hear it clearly, but most likely in that question is a word which you find difficult. Maybe a phrase or collocation which throws you, confuses you, catches you off balance. So we know when you say, can you repeat the question? We know that there's a word in there that you have trouble with. And we know what the word is. Because if you've got trouble with it, particularly say in one country like Vietnam, everybody's Vietnamese, 100 people before you have had the same problem with the same word. So the examiner will repeat the question, but if he's doing his job properly, he'll re-stress the word that you have trouble with, because he knows it. There used to be the word bird in the exam, and nobody could get the word bird. The examiner would say, bird? Do you like birds? And nobody knew what the examiner was saying. When they find, and the examiner might be going like that, bird. People will say, oh, you mean bird. I just knocked my water over. You mean bird. Well, of course, the examiner didn't mean bird, he meant bird. But he'd been pronouncing it correctly. Examiners might say, tell me about your house. And candidates might say, oh, I'm very well, thank you. Because they've heard house and health for some reason. So if the word sounds weird, have I misheard it? But sure, if you ask to repeat the question, he will repeat it. He cannot paraphrase it. He cannot rephrase it. But he'll re-stress it. But be aware, and this is very, very important, which I'm coming to, that if you don't know a word that you hear, ask him. With the bird, the examiners were waiting for somebody to say, I'm sorry, I don't know what you mean by bird. And he'd say, bird, flying animal. So if you do not know a word, ask. In part 1, if you don't know a word, ask. Say, I'm sorry, what do you mean by gymnasium? And the examiner will say, oh, sports centre. He wants to help you. He's happy to help you, but you need to ask the word. He can't rephrase the whole question. All right. A few questions here. Can you bear with me? I'll just go and call for some water. 1 moment. Just 1 second. More questions we have there. I hope that answers your question, Maya, about repeating the question. I don't think you asked to repeat it because you didn't hear it. It's the word. Huang Chan Nguyen. I have a question. Should or must the answers in part 3 be formal and academic soundbite? Great question. They tend to be slightly more formal, slightly more academic, but they don't have to be. In part 3, we'll come to those details, but in part 3, if the examiner thinks you need a bit of support, a bit of help, he'll ask you less academic, more simple questions. If he thinks you've shown yourself to be quite strong and confident, he'll tend to ask you slightly more academic, slightly more probing questions, slightly more abstract questions, which gives you the opportunity to use more vocabulary and a higher level of sophistication. All right. So the more formal and academic you are, can be more impressive, but less so in speaking, of course, than in writing. All right. It's more a case of natural language. So you might even use some native speaker slang. Not offensive stuff, of course, but if it's common for a native speaker, then that can be impressive. So being more formal academic is not a bad thing, but don't worry if you're not so much, if that helps you. Huang Chan Nguyen. Sort of, if you think you're on a 7 or 8, then obviously more academic, more formal, again, more co-location is good. If I don't use so many cohesive devices, but 1 or 2, even 3, in the whole test, that's from you again, Huang Chan. Just remember to use some. Practice using some, because if you learn the cohesive devices, like the discourse markers, if you learn them on their own without really knowing how to use them, then you can slip up. So don't just learn a list of them. Practice having entire sentences and answers with them in it, so you know exactly when, where, and how to use them and how not to use them. But I would expect in a whole interview to probably hear a handful, at least, probably, over a whole interview. 1 or 2 or 3 over a whole interview is probably not fantastic, but it's okay. All right, but certainly, as I said, if you overuse them, then you're on a 5. So that's why sometimes people don't learn how to use them, when to use them. Okay, good. All right, next. Okay for time. It's great to have you all here. Hope you're enjoying it. So the format, in case you didn't know, some of you out there won't, of course. Part 1, 4 to 5 minutes, not 45, 4 to 5. You get 3 sets of 3 or 4 questions. The first set is always 3 on the topics I mentioned. The other sets are all on familiar topics, and there'll be up to 4 of them. They're scripted for the examiner. He can't change them, he can't rephrase them, he can't paraphrase them. However, if you don't give a full answer, all he can say is why, all right, or why not. Sometimes a how, but he can't ask anything else. Now remember, when he says a why, he may be talking about something slightly earlier on in the sentence. So please don't think the examiner's not listened or mad or something. When the examiner says why, don't question why you're saying why. Don't say, like I just told you, like I said. He's heard what you said. Maybe as he thought about the why, you just added something on the end. Whatever, doesn't matter. Don't question why he said why. It means give him more information, all right? Like, for example, if he said, what do you like to do at the weekends? And you said, at the weekends, I like to go fishing because it's relaxing. And he says, why? Doesn't mean he didn't hear you say that you like to go fishing because it's relaxing. He might mean, why is it relaxing? Doesn't matter why he asks. Just take it to mean I didn't give enough of an answer. Therefore, I've got to give some more information. All right. And again, pronunciation comes into it. Once there was a candidate said to the examiner said, what's your favourite colour? This is way back in the past. The examiner said, what's your favourite colour? And the man said, why? So of course the examiner said, why? And he said, that's right, why? But he meant white. So just give more information. Other things again, like I say, you can ask about the word. Make sure you do ask about the word. Give more information. Just keep talking. Don't worry about the time. Don't worry about saying too much. He will move you on. Now, a key thing again in part 1 is to show off your vocabulary. If the examiner says to you, what's your favourite music? Why waste an opportunity by saying, I like pop? Tell him what you like, what you don't like. I like pop music, but my sister likes jazz, and my parents, they like classical music. I used to like rock and roll, but now I've changed my mind as I got older. Show off the genre. Show off the vocabulary you've learned for that genre. Music, books, films. If you talk about movies and films, so much vocabulary. Instead of saying, oh, I like a love story, you can say, oh, I like a biopic. Anyone know a biopic? Biopic means a biographical picture. It means a life story. Nelson Mandela, J.F. Kennedy, people like that. A biopic. A thriller, sci-fi, action, romance, tear-jerker. You know, learn the vocabulary of books, films, movies, things like that, you know, and don't just think about the ones you like. If he asks you what you like, if he asks you what you don't like, tell him what you like, don't like, your family, friends, in your house, whatever, to show off the vocabulary. Don't really worry about giving a question an answer that's too long, as long as it's relevant. As I say, he keeps an eye on the time, not you. Careful again with some of those discourse markers, if you like. A favourite one that people get wrong is things like, to be honest. Now, to be honest, is a discourse marker, but you use it when you're about to say something surprising or a little bit naughty. Did you like your teacher? To be honest, I hated them. Not people say, to be honest, my name's Gould, or to be honest, I work in a bank. To be honest is before something a little surprising or a little naughty. Right? So listen carefully for the tense. What tense are you being asked the question? Part 1 is about familiar topics, so it's usually the present. Usually habits, routines, hobbies. Don't mix up the word habit and hobby, which often happens. In Vietnam, use synonyms, pastime. If you're asked about your hobby, say, one of my pastimes is, that's P-A-S-T-I-M-E, pastime. Again, synonymize and paraphrase. Don't just repeat the question back to the examiner. Okay. In the part 1, a bit more. Any more questions coming? You're going to compare and contrast, perhaps, in part 1. Well, that's more in part 3, but it might happen in part 1. The past, I mentioned, when you were a child, did you? Don't we hear it so much? When I were a child. When you were a child, did you? When I was a child. Present routines, do you often? Present customs, when do people do X, Y, Z? Again, this could be more of a part 3, but in a part 1, do you think people will X, Y, Z more or less in the future? Do you think things will be different in the future? Keep the questions coming. So part 1, practice. A question, for those of you who've never seen a practice IELTS, questions might be about hometown, might be, how long have you lived in your hometown? So how are you going to answer that? What tense is that? It's the present perfect. So you're going to answer in the present perfect. I've lived in Hanoi since I was a child. Not sin I were a child. Since, remember the word endings. It's a kind of S sound, isn't it? Since, C-E. Again, you can always practice these things. I mean, practice the vocabulary of your hometown as well. Traffic congestion, local museums, lots of parks, the air's polluted, the air's clean, whatever, There are very certain things that you can practice. Study, things like, what are you studying? What's your job? Again, if you're out there and you're watching now and you're sort of in your 30s or 40s, the examiner's very likely to ask you about your job. Because most people the examiner sees sort of high school, university age. So, if you look like university, you'll probably get study. Look like you're working, you'll probably get work. Future questions, what will you do after you graduate? Okay. I mentioned these things. Yeah. Got any questions on part 1? I'm going to quickly pop the questions about part 1 now. Okay, thanks for your questions, Huang Chang Nguyen. Do I know you? Okay. Right, no questions on part 1? No? Remember, in total, it's 4 to 5 minutes. And you're likely to be pushed close to the 5 minutes. Part 2. Now, the 1 minute planning. I never know why some candidates will say, I don't need a minute, can I start now? Because there's no benefit, there's no bonus, there's no advantage. And almost always, someone who asks to start early runs out of things to say before the 2 minutes. Now, you're told by the examiner you have 1 to 2 minutes. Well, that's really not true. The examiner will push you for the 2 minutes. He'll say, can you tell me some more? He won't really let you off the hook. He won't let you go in just a minute. 2 minutes is desirable, and he'll stop you at the 2 minutes. So you need to plan a lot. And during that 1 minute, You can plan the structure, plan the vocabulary, plan the grammar, and think of ideas. Don't bother to write whole sentences, when you're planning with a pen and paper. Don't write on the book, please. Introduce a topic. Again, don't repeat the question back to the examiner. The question could last sort of 10 seconds, 15 seconds. If you waste that 15 seconds by simply repeating the question, I'm going to talk about a time when I was very lonely and so I had to buy a book, if that was the question, it's just not a good example. Don't repeat the whole thing back. Cut to the answer or paraphrase. Note the tense, I think I mentioned. Outline the structure. So if you were asked, for example, describe a long journey you made, then you could answer with, today, I'd like to talk about a lengthy trip I once took. Describe a long journey you made. Today, I'll talk about a lengthy trip I once took. So you've paraphrased and kept concise the whole question, but you've still introduced it. You synonymized and paraphrased here. Right, Chris, you come in. Oh, okay, interesting. Okay. I have some ideas to answer the questions in part 1. I don't know if it's okay to use that, like ending an answer by asking a rhetorical question. An interesting question. I've not really come across that question before from anyone. Because rhetorical questions are not sort of naturally there in a speaking, because, obviously the examiner's not going to answer any question anyway, in terms of discussing it, like, I had a great time in Spain, have you been there? And that's not rhetorical because it requires an answer. Don't ask those questions. Don't say, I've been to Spain, have you ever been there? Because the examiner's not going to answer. But asking a rhetorical question, if it's sort of natural, like you might say, people might say naturally, well, it's a very interesting question. Say, like, in part 1 and 2, as I say, you're not going to get a response. If you said, oh, China's a boring place to visit, isn't it? It's a kind of rhetorical question. You're not going to get an answer anyway. And if you're talking specifically about part 1, I've never been asked that. I'm just trying to think really if it's a negative thing or not. I can't think it'll be a positive thing, but it might be. So you've just said there, would you ride a bike to work in the future? Okay, so just adding the right on the end. But if you're using that in part 1, I think that's quite nice and quite natural. As long as it's obvious you're not expecting an answer, because you would never get an answer in part 1. It's probably more natural in part 3, but if I take it you're still talking about part 1, that's actually quite a nice way, that's quite natural. Juan has written here, would you ride a bike to work in the future? So assuming this is a part 1 question. She's put the answer, I guess I'd try to use a bike as my regular vehicle in the future. The environmental thing is being taken as a top priority, right? I think that's nice and natural. Yeah. Just don't sit there waiting for the examiner to answer you. I think that's nice. Yeah. That answer your question, I hope. Good. Good one, that. It's very natural. Part 2 difficulties. What are the main issues you might have with part 2? We've dealt with part 1. Any other questions on part 1? Part 2, your main issues. Hey, probably like you in Vietnam. In the UK, everything's in lockdown. Australia, everywhere. You can't get a haircut anywhere. I should actually put there the environment thingy. It's okay. It's a bit informal. It's okay. Yeah, environment thingy. Yeah, maybe I'd say thing, but native speakers do say thingy sometimes. Okay, if it comes across natural, it's nice. Main issues with part two, well, I think people, they're frightened they're not going to have enough to say. And as I say, generally, if you spend that minute wisely, you will have enough to say. Also, just refer back to the question. If in doubt, it's amazing how many new ideas you get when you look again at the question, because people are nervous when they read the question. They want to get on with writing their plan. So they forget that if they look again at the question, they'll probably get some more inspiration. They probably forgot something. And sometimes people misread it in a hurry. They're stressed and they accidentally end up talking about the wrong thing. Now, if you talk about the wrong thing because you've memorized an answer and you've learnt about the life history of Mr. X, and you're determined to tell the examiner about the life history of Mr. X, and you've been asked about a holiday you went on, then you'll be penalised. But frequently, people accidentally answer the wrong question. They didn't notice something in it. They maybe misread a word or not noticed a word, and they answer the wrong question. So by looking back at the question can help you. Okay, just a little something come in here. Oh, okay, you haven't heard me because I had the mic on mute when I went to get water. Sorry. Oh, sorry. Oh dear. Oh no, oh no, oh no. Oh, I'm so sorry. Oh dear. Okay, yeah, that's the problem. Now you can hear me, I think. Now you can hear me. Yeah? Now it's okay. I put it on mute for the water. Oh dear. Okay. Oh, so sorry. Okay. I think you can all hear me now, right? Quickly going back, that's for Huang Changyuan, can you just tell me again which question I answered when I was on mute? Which question you didn't hear an answer for? I'll come back to it. Okay, I'm sorry about that. All right. Okay. Oh, so silly all the time. All right. Okay. So, part 2 tips. Memorized answers now. People give a memorized answer. Yeah, it's good. I'm so sorry, everybody. I think I must have been talking to a muted microphone for the last 5 minutes. I'm sorry. All right. So there are lots of questions from Huang Chang Nguyen. Tell me which ones I didn't answer, and I'll come back to them. Okay? Because you talked about rhetorical questions and cohesive devices. How many to use? So just send your question again, Huang. I'm ever so sorry. All right. Just send it again, okay? And I'll deal with it because I don't know whether you were hearing me when I spoke. Okay. Say with part 2, keep talking, go for the 2 minutes. He'll stop you, he'll move you on. The end of part 2, you have a bridging question. Maybe you won't have one if you've answered the question in front of the examiner already. If he's heard you answer it already, then he won't ask it. Otherwise, he may ask you 1, he may ask you 2. Again, he has been listening to you. So, maybe he's looking for a slightly different angle to what you've said. So don't say, like I told you, something like that, And he actually only wants a fairly short answer. All right. He only wants maybe 20 seconds, 30 seconds maximum of answer from you. All right. I'm still feeling so terrible about how much I was saying there that wasn't being heard. If anybody can tell me sort of the last thing, what it was I told you when you didn't hear me, if you can tell me the last point I was at, I'll go back and quickly cover that. All right. It's probably on part 2. Okay, you've probably all been looking at your computer saying, what's the matter, what's the matter? It was me. Got the water and I was on mute. All right. In IELTS, your teacher will often say to you, it's okay to lie. Yeah, it's okay to lie, but make it believable. It's probably better not to if you can. But like if the examiner says, tell me about a place that you'd like to visit, don't say I'd like to visit Mars or something like that, keep it realistic and believable. Right. I was saying, I know probably when I was on mute, to refer back to the question. The question will always help you again, will prompt you again. Okay. Hopefully you stopped hearing me not so long ago. So yeah, if in doubt, go back to the question. All right. For more ideas. In your 1 minute preparation, that's where you put in your really fantastic vocabulary, great collocations. Maybe an idiom if you think it's going to be appropriate that you can use to impress the examiner. All right. And finally, I've got on the bottom of my notes here, no singing, because there have been instances where the candidate was asked about their favourite song and they decided to sing it to the examiner. Now, however beautiful that might be, it's not like Vietnam's Got Talent and they get a load of marks from the judges. If you sang, it's memorized. Memorized is nothing. You cannot be marked on memorized speeches. If you go to the internet and you find some nice, you think a nice memorized part 2s, you took a trip to Da Nang, this X, Y, and Z happened, you went to Saigon, A, B, C happened. If you've memorized that answer, if you found it on the internet and you think, hey, that's a great answer, examiners in Hanoi, for example, they may interview 5,000 candidates a year. They've heard it. If you found it on the internet, they've heard it. They probably heard it yesterday, the day before. So don't bother. Just get your English good and natural instead. Okay. Part 2, typical question, something like this. Might be a typical part 2 question. The kind of one you might get. Or something like this. And this is where, hopefully I wasn't on mute, when I talked about a person you know. You know about someone, you know of someone, or you know someone. Okay? Famous people in history, you can't say are people you know. They're people you know about. And often, be questions like, you admire them or why you admire them, something like that. Okay? Right, can we ask any other questions on part 2? Particularly if you sent your question, Huang Chang Nguyen, for example, and I answered them, but we were on mute by mistake. So sorry. Did you hear the answer to that? Anybody got questions on part 2, including your question if you didn't hear my answer? Anyone? No? Nothing else about part 2? Again, I said make sure you talk for 2 minutes. You get pushed to go for 2 minutes. You don't get let off the hook after 1 minute. All right. Check the tense. Make a note on the paper of the tense. Write past tense in front of you, because Vietnamese do tend to forget. Vietnamese, you'll be doing very well. You'll be ticking along, being a 7. The examiner's thinking 7, and then you say, yesterday I go. Last week I have, because you slip up and make a basic error. Okay, so even if it helps to write on your piece of paper, past tense, present perfect, future, conditional, something like that. Okay, to remind you. Everybody happy? I still feel so terrible about that mute because I went to get the water. All right. Okay, so happy on part 2. Huang Chang Nguyen, have you had your question answered now? Another one I didn't answer here. She puts, would you like to ride a bike to work in the future? I guess I would try to. Oh, yes, I did answer that one. Okay, well, maybe you didn't hear it. But would you like to ride a bike to work in the future? I guess I would try to use a bike as my regular vehicle in the future. The environment thingy is being taken as a top priority, right? I think that she was asking about rhetorical questions there. Stop me, sorry if I said it. I think I said it on mute. That's okay, that's good. Environment thing is being taken as a top priority, right? That's a rhetorical question, that's good, that's natural. You now say, is double negative considered wrong? Because I heard a lot of people say that. Okay, it's interesting. Double negative is actually technically grammatically wrong. It is used sometimes by native speakers who don't speak good English. Parts of the East End of London, they say, I ain't got no money. That is wrong. That is bad. It's kind of natural, but it's natural for somebody from the East End of London who can't speak very good English, or the western suburbs of Sydney. So it's not a good thing. However, sometimes a native speaker, a well-educated, well-spoken native speaker, may use a double negative kind of accidentally. That's where, when you look at the grammar and the fluency for band score 9 and band score 8, it does allow some grammatical error, even in a 9. It doesn't allow some hesitation and repetition in a band score 9 for fluency. The reason is because a native speaker who's chatting away fluently may make technically a grammatical error, technically hesitate or repeat in the fluency because he's changed direction. So he may begin in one tense and he changes direction in his thoughts. And so technically, if you track back to what he said, he's made a grammatical mistake. Or he hesitated not because he's looking for language, looking for grammar, trying to remember it. He's changed his thought process. So they can make those mistakes. So they might end up making saying a double negative. But that will be a natural native speaker mistake because he's changed direction. It's like if you're writing a sentence and you change your mind, you can rub it out, but you can't rub out what you've just said. All right, does that answer your question? It's a good question. Okay, everyone should raise their own knowledge about the environment. Okay, so I hope I answered your question about double negative. The use of them there instead of his, her. For example, everyone should raise their own knowledge about. Okay, co-location. We don't say raise with knowledge. We say increase their knowledge, expand their knowledge. We never say raise their knowledge. We could say raise their knowledge level. Your question is there instead of his or her. Yes, it's a tricky one. In speak and in writing, you try and avoid it. In writing, you wouldn't want to say raise their knowledge. But in writing, you wouldn't want to keep saying his or her because it's a bit too formal. You'd probably avoid it by saying, in writing, by raising the student's knowledge level. In speaking, it's not really negative. Okay, another question from Frank. It's not really negative in speaking, say there, because in speaking, native speakers do tend to say there, raise their knowledge level. Again, if you said raise his or her knowledge level, that's not a bad thing because it's grammatically correct. My advice would be probably use the his or her once at least, so the examiner knows that you're aware what's correct. But you could try and avoid it by substitution, like, raising the student's level. The student can increase. If you use his or her once, it's good, the examiner knows. If you use there, it's kind of natural. You can avoid it by substitution. It's not, for speaking, it's not a big negative because we often, native speakers actually make grammatical mistakes when they speak because it's kind of informal spoken language. Often they might use like a few examples, but anyway, it's kind of natural, right? What if the examiner stops my answer in part 2? I haven't finished my answer, will I lose score? No. Now, it's a very good question. There's only one reason why the examiner will stop your answer in part 2, and that's because you've hit his clock, you've hit the you've hit the 2 minutes, and he has to stop you. To be honest, it's I would say 90% of the time, maybe 95% of the time, it's a good thing, not a bad thing, because it means you have been talking fluently and appropriately. If you've been talking irrelevantly, if you had a memorized answer, of course, it can't save you by talking for 2 minutes, but talking for 2 minutes is better than talking for 1 minute, and then the examiner will say, can you tell me some more? Okay, because he always will. If you don't get close to the 2 minutes, he'll always ask you for more. All right, so you certainly won't lose a score. But of course, it's for you in your 1 minute preparation to try to make sure that when you plan, if you've got some juicy vocabulary, some juicy collocation, you fit them in sooner rather than later. All right. It's great questions there. Anything else on part 2? Okay, I hope Huang Chang Nguyen, I answered all your questions without the mute on. Right, part 3. So we know about part 3. It's just got my water over here. Part 3 is 4 to 5 minutes, and it's slightly more abstract, slightly more formal, perhaps slightly more academic. As I mentioned earlier, he will ask according to how well you're doing. So if you need a bit of support, he will use the slightly less challenging questions. If you've shown yourself to be quite strong, then he'll give you the chance to prove yourself further, to show off your vocabulary and grammar, perhaps. All right, part 3. Now, if you don't understand the question, Certainly ask him to explain it. Unlike part one, he will explain it. He should paraphrase it. He shouldn't just repeat the same question louder. He should paraphrase it, rephrase it to help you. Make sure in part three you extend and develop your answer. Think about two sides of the issue, using things like, on the other hand, having said that. Think of an example from your own experience, but put it in an abstract position. In part three, you should not be talking about your family, your close friends, your own school, your workplace, specifically about that. You can talk about things that you know from your experience, but put them in the third person, put them in the abstract. Because as soon as you say, take my mum as an example, the examiner should cut you off and say, let's think about people in general. Let's think about Vietnam in general. You know, my best friend, she likes driving. We don't really want to know about your best friend in part three. We want to know about people in Vietnam, people in society. All right. If you don't know the answer to a question, you can say something like, I don't really know why that is. I don't know why they cut down the trees in Hanoi. I don't know why my school's expensive or something like that. Just say why, but say why, because I don't live in that area or something like that. So don't be afraid to say if you don't know the answer to the question, and develop the topic to a higher level. So, for example, traffic problems. You've been talking about traffic problems. You can say traffic problems can lead to new ideas and concepts. Fluency and coherence very much includes development of the topic development of the idea. All right, you can impress with that. So don't just stick to the question you've been asked. Develop it. Give examples. Always develop and give examples. Now I'm just going to get some more water knocked it over. Please don't run away. And I'll put the mute on, and I promise you I'll okay. A couple of you have gone, sorry. I'm back. So I was talking part three. Topic development is very, very important. All right, in part three, the examiner, if you're showing reasonable level, the examiner will develop the topic with you. The questions kind of develop from fairly or a bit more simple to developed. But if you develop it yourself, that's a good thing to do. Part three, tasks. Now, in part three, you're always asked some specific tasks. But the examiner won't tell you the task you're being asked. So you might be asked to compare or contrast. You might be asked to agree or disagree. You might be asked to explain or describe a process. Remember to identify examples of the problems or solutions, and also say you won't hear the words. So if you're asked whether you agree or disagree something, they won't use the words agree or disagree. They'll say, what do you think? Do you think that's true? Things like that. Okay, keep the questions coming, please. You can suggest solutions. You've got to constantly think. You've only got 4 to 5 minutes. By the time you get to part three, the examiner's got a good idea in his head what level you are. Maybe you're on the borderline. Maybe you're, 6, 7, 5, 6, 7. It's your best chance to try and improve, to make that final big impression. All right? So examples, give examples, support your arguments, think of both sides of an argument, just like with writing, but keep it to society, keep it abstract, not personal. Any other questions so far? The numbers are going back up. I'm sorry about that. Mute. Compare, contrasting. Here's, see if you can see that. Here's a kind of example answer for you. See if you can read that. Now, I'll read it to you. This is a kind of spoken answer to a particular question. Remember, when you compare, there's the same sort of comparisons are generally made. Old and young people, men and women, past and present, or maybe present and future. They're the comparisons you generally need to make. Now, this answer, okay, the person saying, well, I think these days is totally different from the past. In the old days, life was harder in many aspects. For example, we didn't have the technology we have now to help us. Microwaves, freezers, the internet, smartphones. But I also think life was simpler, more straightforward, because technology brings problems as well as advantages. Obsession with social media can lead to negative consequences, such as trolling or online bullying, victimization, fraud, peer pressure. All right? Now, in that short extract there, the candidate hasn't repeated the same word really anywhere. They've used synonyms, they've used paraphrase, they've shown that they understand what something means. They've said trolling, they've said consequences such as trolling or online bullying. So they've even explained that they know what trolling means. All right? Then we might have describing a process. Please keep the questions coming. Describing a process. They might say, here we go, I'll do it here. Well, the government should implement several policies on crime reduction. Firstly, the number of police on the beat should be increased. Then they could make punishments harsher. Finally, the authorities could try to lessen the gap between rich and poor. Through doing all of these actions, the crime rate should drop. Few issues there. We've used the passive. So we don't have to keep saying they should. Once we said they could make punishments harsher. Then we said, before that we said, firstly, the number of police on the beat. That's a co-location. That's something native speakers say. The number of police on the beat should be increased. The passive should be increased. Then we have got a boring active. Then they could make punishments harsher. It's very natural. Native speakers would say they, but who is they? In fact, they is the government. We've said government already. They is the authorities. Later we use the word the authorities. The authorities is a synonym for the government. We do often say they. They should ban it. They should stop it happening. They should do this. But use the authorities, the government. Use the passive. It should implement several policies on crime reduction. Now, people might say on reducing crime. But that's fine. But particularly when you're writing, you don't want to write policies on reducing crime. You should always look to nominalize, particularly in writing. You should nominalize and say crime reduction. Instead of farmers are producing more food, you can say food production has increased. All right? Nominalize in writing particularly, but it's also quite nice in speaking. All right? Co-location, the gap between rich and poor. You know, collocation, collocation, collocation. Much better than idioms. And I recommend that you find yourself a collocation dictionary and learn some. Suggesting solutions. Again, I have here a suggested solution to a problem. We'll look at that. And I'll read it to you. I guess it's getting on for 6 o'clock now over there. In my view, there are several possible solutions available. One viable solution, collocation, viable solution. One viable strategy would be for banks and financial institutions to check the credit rating of people applying for loans or credit cards, meaning those who don't have enough money or sufficient income would not get further into debt by borrowing even more, often at usurious rates of interest from payday lenders. Now, that entire answer there was 2 sentences. One sentence, in my view, there are several possible solutions available, and then we have the solution. That's one entire sentence. In writing, that would be fantastic for grammar, extremely complex. Earlier I mentioned reduced relative clauses. Now, I couldn't think of a good example. Here's one that I put in here. One viable strategy would be for banks and financial institutions to check the credit rating of people applying for loans or credit cards. People applying for loans, not people who apply for loans. And then another one, meaning those who don't have enough money, instead of saying which means that. Reduce relative clauses. You use the present participle. Hope you've got a picture of that. You can study it, analyze it. Okay. Giving solutions. Give you this again. This is an example of giving solutions. Please keep the questions coming. My perspective is that people need to be more responsible with money. Collocation, responsible with money. It is often very hard to make ends meet. Now that's idiomatic language that's appropriate and good. It's often very hard to make ends meet, but what I mean by this is they shouldn't buy things they don't need or spend money they don't have. Spending beyond their means. Collocation. Spending beyond their means. In this way, they can avoid getting into a debt trap. Great collocation, debt trap. Okay. Nanduk, I'm not sure who you are, Nanduk, but anyway, I think that's a good sign. Thank you. Yeah, debt trap. Spending beyond their means. Make ends meet. They're good collocations and idioms that are good. All right, we've overrun, getting to 2 hours, but we'll come in about 10 minutes, I think. Part 3, the format. Introduce your answer to the frame. Make your first argument or point. Support it with an example. Make a second case or argument or point and support that with an example or a result. All right? Same as writing, same as university writing. Support, develop and support with examples or expert opinion or data and statistics. Don't make it up. Example, data and statistics or expert opinion. Now, same as for writing, as I say to candidates, in the writing it says, give examples from your own knowledge and experience. We don't want to know about your Auntie Flo. We don't want to know about your Uncle Goom. We want to know about your world. And your world is Vietnam, Hanoi, Saigon, Southeast Asia, whatever. You can't have a good answer if you haven't planned and prepared and anticipated. So just like for writing, you can't phone a friend, go 50-50. In the writing, you need to have examples in your head. So the same for speaking. Very likely you'll be asked about the environment. Don't go in with a blank head. Go in with some examples of pollution in the river, some examples of the water in Hanoi when it went bad, you know. Have examples in your head in advance. As I said to you, if you're being asked to agree or disagree, they won't say agree or disagree to you. See, I just spoke there and said they being he or she. They won't use those words. So you need to work out for yourself what is the task. Some of the tasks you might be asked. Here's some examples. None of the material today is, of course, in any way confidential. It's all typical out there. What are the major causes of and types of pollution in your country? You can't find them in the interview room. You can't say, hang on a minute, I'll check Google. You know, you need them in your head. A friend of mine had a t-shirt that said, Google. I don't need Google. My wife knows everything. You need to know everything before you go in. Have some examples. What should individuals and communities do to help protect the environment? Same as writing, the question says, what should individuals and communities? So try and be careful to make sure you talk about individuals and communities. Not as important as in writing, but certainly that's what you're asked, so try to address it. And if you think you haven't got enough material, remember, individuals and communities you are asked. Maybe you compare them, contrast them. Do you think recycling will become more common in the future? Do you think people were more environmentally aware, or greener in the past or now? Are younger or older people more concerned about the environment? How can people reduce their environmental damage, their carbon footprint? Now, that question says carbon footprint. It's less likely the question will say carbon footprint because a lot of people might not understand what carbon footprint means and they'd have to ask for it to be explained. But it's a perfect opportunity for you, if the question says, how can people reduce their environmental damage? It's a perfect example, a perfect opportunity for you to put in that language, to say, well, there's a lot of controversy about people's carbon footprints. Okay, so if you hear the more simple version in the question, environmental damage, use it as an opportunity. Don't repeat environmental damage. Don't say the word back to the examiner. Paraphrase, put in your wonderful synonym, carbon footprint. Are the environmental problems that developed and developing countries face all the same? Okay, that's comparing, isn't it? Contrasting. Developed and developing countries. Okay. Final tips. We're nearly there. Thank you, all of you, for your attendance today. It's been a pleasure. I apologise. I think it must have been 5 minutes of the mute on. Okay, disappointed in myself. Okay, the final tips. If you've got any suggestions for final tips, please send them in and I'll share them. Practice daily likely topics in several tenses. Practice every day in several tenses the likely topics. Practice a recount, a recollection. That is telling a story of something that happened to you, like a part 2. Learn examples on main topics, learning both points of view for your world. Examples, like I mentioned before. Practice speaking as much as you can, especially 1 hour before the test, ideally with a more advanced friend. So if you've got a friend who you admire and you think, wow, I wish I could speak English like them, let them speak English with you an hour before the test. And maybe it'll rub off on you. It loosens up your tongue, it loosens up your thinking. Maybe you begin to think in English for the 13 minutes of the interview. That would be nice. Look at those band descriptors. I told you where they are. Find them, print them, learn them. Look at 7, look at 8, look at 5. what you don't want to be doing. 6 is pretty common sense, really. 5 is, I must make sure I don't do that. Must make sure I don't do that. 7 is good, using them properly. So what you should do and what you should not do. Remember, there's no magic bullet. Magic bullet is an idiom. Magic bullet. There's only hard work. A magic bullet, there's not some miracle cure. Another idiom. Okay. Magic bullet, an easy answer. Only hard work. And memorization is not the answer. Again, if you've memorized an answer, we've heard it before. And if the examiner has had part 1 and part 2 with memorized answers, in part 3 he's going to have to ask some more tricky, less predictable questions to try to find out genuinely what your level is. All right? So he's not trying to be mean, but if he gets to part 3 and he's heard the story of the trip to Da Nang that he's heard 50 times before, exactly the same, and maybe it wasn't even relevant for the question, or his part 1 he heard was full of memorizations, it's not the answer. Spend that time, instead of memorizing, improving. Record yourself, listen to yourself, and play it to a friend for errors. Ask your friend, do I sound natural? You can maybe even, if in terms of pronunciation, you could even play a listening extract from a listening test, and you can say the same words as if you get the same stress and intonation. Learn a wide range of vocabulary. Like I said, vocabulary of genres, books, movies, transport. Learn the synonyms, the antonyms. Learn the lexical family. All right? You can even use the word genre. It's a good word to use, Rock and roll is a popular genre in my house. If you're studying overseas, this is the naughtiest thing for Vietnamese. Vietnamese person I know, Trung, you know him, your brother-in-law, Trung, who said he's moved to Darwin and he's got a room in a house. I thought, great, he's looking for a job. He's got a room in a house in Darwin. And I said, is there by any chance somebody else Vietnamese in your house? And he said, oh, yeah, we're all Vietnamese. It's great. Well, if you're going overseas, honestly, in Sydney, people go to Sydney for IELTS interviews, and they go from Canberra, the ANU, the Australian National University. To get to the ANU, you need a 7 to get in. And these candidates, they've been to the ANU for 2 years, and the examiner sits there thinking, this guy's a 5. Maybe he's about to start at the ANU. Maybe he's in a foundation course. And it turns out the person had been to the ANU for 2 years. But they were a 7 when they went in. They lived in an English-speaking country, watching with English-speaking all around them. And after 2 years at the ANU, the 7 they went in with had become a 5. It's true. So if you're going to be overseas, have one person in your house. Have all your Vietnamese friends, but have one person in your house who's Korean, Japanese, or German. Any other questions before we go? None Duck sent a look like a kind of smiley thing that's now gone. So people often say to me, what can I do? Just about finishing now. People often say to me, what can I do if I'm scared? What can I do in the interview if I'm really nervous and I think my English isn't very good? Well, my advice is simply this, almost certainly the Vietnamese that the examiner may speak will be much, much less impressive than your English. So if you're an IELTS 5 in English and IELTS 6 in English, I bet you your English is better than the native speaker examiner's English is. Yes? So who is the smartest in the room? Okay? In total, in aggregate, I think you will be the smartest one because your English will be better than his Vietnamese. And then I should mention to you that today has been brought to you in cooperation with ATS, Avenue to Success. They are experts at overseas placements for university, visas, and accommodation. They know all about it. This is the information for us, VUI Learn, part of VUI Group. We have the Facebook, the podcasts, Skype, YouTube, and the website. contact@vuigroup.com. And for ATS, you want to get your overseas placement, admin.hanoi@ats.org.vn. And a little bit more information about ATS, as I have mentioned. They are experienced experts, many, many years of experience, all right, for finding you a place at university. Australia, anywhere Anglophone. Anglophone means Australia, Canada, New Zealand, USA, Ireland. They've got a special offer at the moment. You get an IELTS test refund for all students using ATS for overseas study. Again, it is admin.hanoi@ats.org.vn. And for me, it's contact@vuigroup.com. Please send any queries you wish. And also, if you want speaking practice or writing practice, again, contact@vuigroup.com. That's contact@vuigroup.com. You can have a simulated speaking where you can listen to the speaking mock questions, and you can record your answer, send in an MP3 for a very, very, very reasonable fee. Send in the MP3 with your sound answer, response to the question, or you can actually have a live mock interview, a live mock speaking with realistic questions with an IELTS expert of many years, all right? And for writing, you can send your scripts in, you can be given a specific question, you can choose your own question, or you can have a choice of 3 questions. And it will be marked, corrected, assessed, commented upon by an IELTS expert of 50,000 scripts. All right. So speaking or writing, contact@vuigroup.com. Just send your query, ask about it, very reasonable price. Okay, and if you get together with friends and order several writings, several speakings, it's much cheaper. All right, so that's speaking and writing. Okay, so finally, thank you for your time. It's been 2 hours. So thank you, and I'm sorry about the muting. Okay, so goodbye. Thank you all for joining. There's no more questions outstanding. Okay, good. Particularly there, Huang Chang Nguyen. If there's any of those questions that I was on mute, then send them to me again. All right, so thank you very much. Goodbye.